What if Jack the Ripper came back to life? Jack the Ripper is one of the most infamous criminals in the entire world. Part of his infamy stems from the sheer brutality behind his crimes, and part of it comes from the mystery that still surrounds him. To this day, Jack the Ripper remains an unidentified serial killer who is credited with the murders of at least 5 women and potentially even more. These killings were awful, and the crime scenes left behind from Jack the Ripper are noted as being some of the most gruesome in history. These murders took place in London in the span of just over a month, all in the same area around the Whitechapel district. This is why Jack the Ripper is also sometimes called the Whitechapel Murderer. Also, if you're wondering why his name is Jack the Ripper in the first place, this is due to the nature of the killings. I can't go into too much detail in this video about how the bodies were found, or else YouTube would never show it to you, but understand that they were very unnatural. Most of the women that Jack targeted were ladies of the night. It's unclear whether he had a particular grievance with their line of work, or if these women were just the easiest targets for him. In fact, his motives are pretty much completely unclear to this day. Because he was never actually caught, it's impossible to say exactly what caused him to do this, but many people theorize that it was a mixture of sexual sadism and rage. It's also widely believed that Jack was proud of these sick killings because he would often taunt the police officers. Several letters were sent to the police force taunting them about upcoming attacks he intended to perform, or about his previous murders. Even with these letters coming regularly to the police and the small area that the murders were committed in, a definitive killer has never been found. Many names have been tossed out there. In fact, over 100 people have been accused over the years, but nothing has ever been conclusively confirmed. Either way, this video is not about determining who the true killer was, it's about discussing what could potentially happen if Jack the Ripper was alive today. Where would he be located? Would he still be a serial killer, and would we be able to catch him this time around? It's time to take a look at what would happen if Jack the Ripper came back to life. So for the purposes of this video, we're just going to assume that Jack the Ripper magically came back to life and that there were no major complications with this process. Also, he's not the actual age he would be in this time, but he's whatever age that he was in 1888 when he was still at large. Sadly, if this was the case and Jack did come back to life, then we have to assume that the brutalistic murders, they would start up again. After the canonical 5, which is the name given to the 5 murders that are largely linked to Jack, there were a few other deaths, but many people think that Jack just stopped after those 5. Now, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that he would have just stopped on his own accord, and therefore the leading theory is that he either died, was incarcerated, or emigrated out of the area completely. This is why we have to assume that if he did come back to life, these crimes would start up again. Based on the brutality of the murders and how similar they all were to each other, we would probably know pretty quickly who we're dealing with if he did come back to life. The earliest profile of the Ripper was done by a police surgeon named Thomas Bond, and he wrote, "All 5 murders no doubt were committed by the same hand. In the first 4, the throats appear to have been cut from left to right. In the last case, owing to the extensive mutilation, it is impossible to say in what direction the fatal cut was made, but arterial blood was found on the wall in splashes close to where the woman's head must have been lying. All the circumstances surrounding the murders lead me to form the opinion that the women must have been lying down when murdered, and in every case, the throat was cut first." So it's this type of crime scene that we could expect to pop up if Jack came back to life. However, one thing we need to ask ourselves is, would he even be able to do it in this day and age? Back then in 1888 London, there were roughly 80,000 inhabitants in the city. Nowadays in London, there's almost 9 million people living there. The sheer volume of people that are now in this city would make it far harder for Jack to commit these crimes compared to back in 1888. There is strength in numbers, and the fact that pretty much anywhere you go there will always be other people around acts as a bit of a defense mechanism for us. Another thing that we need to factor in is the training of the police force. Police training over 100 years ago is notably far worse than it is today. Over the years, investigators have gotten smarter and police work has gotten better, and this would obviously be a major deterrent and would benefit all of us if Jack came back to life. Also, I just mentioned their training, but we need to look at the massive forensic advancements that have been made over the years as well. Forensic science has had some incredible innovations since 1888, and the plethora of information that we would be able to receive now if any of these crimes did take place as opposed to then is such a massive difference, one has to imagine it would be extremely helpful in leading to Jack's eventual capture. All of these things are awesome and would be extremely beneficial to society if Jack did somehow come back to life. But the most important advancement that I haven't even mentioned yet is cell phones. 87% of adults in the United Kingdom in 2020 own and regularly use a smartphone. That means that at any given point, 87% of the population in the United Kingdom, their location, it can be found. It also means that 87% of the population has access to a camera whenever they need it, and also have immediate access to call emergency services if they needed that as well. The fact of the matter is that committing a crime over 100 years ago was far easier than it is today, and with the amount of innovations humans have made, I find it difficult to imagine Jack going unidentified for very long. Therefore, if Jack the Ripper did come back to life, assuming he was to continue his sick and sadistic ways in London, I can confidently say that I believe he would be caught relatively quickly. This is also in part from the massive media storm that would start if Jack the Ripper came back to life. If Jack the Ripper truly did come back to life and the police discovered a crime scene that resembled exactly what Jack would do, then I can only assume the entire world would hear about it immediately. Our phones and the internet would explode with reports that Jack is back and what we should all do if we see anything suspicious. This case ended up getting a lot of public attention, but for the most part, the disappearance of ladies of the night back in the day, they almost went completely unnoticed. It was said that even if this did hit the public, that the upper class wouldn't even really speak on it. That wouldn't be the case today, and I can only hope that we'd be hearing about this on the news and giving it the attention that's required if people did start to go missing. This would especially hit the public and get talked about extensively if Jack was taunting the police like it's expected he did back in 1888. Assuming that Jack the Ripper was caught for his crimes based on the reasons that I've already listed, then we would have one of the most covered trials in history. The media coverage of this trial would be absolutely insane, and we would most likely hear about it every step of the way. I also think it's pretty safe to say that unless the police botch some part of the investigation, that Jack the Ripper would get sentenced to life in prison. In England, where I'm assuming he's getting tried, the longest sentence is until that person's death. Many times the judge will allow for someone's early release after a minimum time served, but in this case, I can't imagine Jack the Ripper ever getting out of prison. He would be there until he died. Therefore, if Jack the Ripper came back to life today, I imagine that he would likely go back to his horrible practices, would sadly take at least one life, but would hopefully be caught very soon afterwards. Unless he becomes the perfect criminal, I doubt that he would be at large for very long. We would also likely all hear about these crimes, and there would be a massive media storm surrounding it. Once he finally is captured, the trial would be covered extensively as well, and assuming everything goes right, Jack the Ripper would end up serving a life sentence in prison. Now, there are obviously a lot of variables that could go into something like this. Because we don't actually know who the real killer was, it's sort of impossible to give a concrete answer. I've been operating this whole video as if Jack the Ripper was a male, but there are some theories that Jack the Ripper was a female. If this was true, then this would undoubtedly change some things about how the events would transpire. I've also been operating in this video as if there was only one killer, but some other theories think that there were multiple people behind the murders, and this would drastically change everything if that was true as well. Now, even if Jack the Ripper was only one person and he was male, which is how we've been tackling this question so far, there's no guarantee that he would stay in London. Truthfully, if he really wanted to get back to his old sick ways, then London today would not be the best spot to do it. Frankly, I don't really want to get into the potential best spots that he could go kill people, because that seems like a pretty sick and weird rabbit hole to go down, but I can guarantee you that it isn't London. The best and most reassuring answer that I can give is that whoever or wherever Jack the Ripper manifests themselves, the advancements in forensic science and just general changes that have happened crime in the world would be too much of a deterrent for them to do nearly as much damage as they did back in 1888. That is my hope, at least. But please let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Would we be able to catch the Ripper? Where would they go? And who do you think was actually behind the horrible crimes that took place over 100 years ago? Thank you so much for watching.